Hello, my quilting friends. My name is Leah Day, and I have recently expanded my continuum frame to 12 feet, which means I have a new set of leaders, and I am going to get them set up with red snappers in this video. I'm going to show you every single step. So let's get started. So here is my old leader cloth with the tube installed. I just want to show you what we're going to be stitching together. We take our new leader cloth and we're going to fold over that dashed edge. This is the edge that does not have Velcro attached. And we fold that over and stitch it so that way the red snapper tubing can slot through. And this is our goal, that the tubing is surrounded nice and tight by the fabric. You don't want this to be really loosey-goosey. That can make clamping with our red snappers a little bit more challenging. So let's fold this over and stitch this gusset together. Now I've spread out my leader cloth. I have it facing wrong side up, and I'm just folding that right side over. And I'm going to use this little felt ruler. I found this. I really like it because you can actually use it. You can press over it and it really helps you do hems and things like that. So I'm going to fold this over an inch. And I do this because then when I run my line of stitching, I can go off that folded edge and I can measure over the exact size of my gusset. So here we go. I'm going to fold that over 1 inch, place a pin on both sides of my little seam gauge. I'm going to do this down the entire line of the leader cloth, making sure that it's consistently folded over 1 inch and nicely pinned. So I'm here on my sewing machine. I've got my leader cloth prepped up and ready to go. And I have threaded my machine with red thread. I like a nice strong contrast between the thread and the white leader cloth. And here on my number plate, I'm going to use my needle plate to help guide my stitching. And we need a 3/4 inch gusset or casing. And there is a line on my needle plate that is lined up with 3/4 of an inch. And so needle in the center position. And if I line up on that line, just making sure that those two things are in connection, then I'm going to maintain that spacing. And this is important. You may have to play with this just a little bit, figure out what line on your needle plate corresponds with 3/4 of an inch. You may have to put some tape if you don't have a line that properly lines up with that. So take your time with this. You could even stitch a little bit and then try the tube in your casing in the gusset. Make sure that it fits nicely. But all we're going to do from here, just put your foot down, stitch, and all I'm doing is just keeping my eye on that folded fabric lined up on that line on my needle plate. Very simple stitching. So Red Snappers has recently just had a little packaging update. The rods and tubes are now a little shorter, and this makes it a little easier for us to ship. And it's the same system though. We're going to connect the little tubes together. They're hollow tubes. I'm going to place a wooden dowel rod inside and insert it about halfway and then press on your next tube. So you're going to create your tubes longer, slightly longer than your leader cloth. I'm just going to connect these together. Then I'm going to insert them into the casing or gusset that we just sewed. There we go. And then now I'm going to thread this through. And this can be a little time consuming. Just be patient. You know, you're just going to slot it through, and the flatter you can keep your leader cloth on your table, the easier it will be. Whenever it gets all hung up though, that's the challenge. So try and spread it out nice and flat, and then just work maybe 6 inches at a time, sliding that tube through that stitched area. You can see my nice contrasting stitching there. The reason I like to contrast is because whenever I'm bringing my fabric around and clamping, I like to be able to see that stitching so I have a straight line to work towards. So here we go. You can see how this is nicely filling in that casing or gusset we sewed. I do have some red snapper extending beyond that edge. and it is fitting really nicely. So now that this is stitched and inserted, let's take it to the long arm and get our new leader cloth installed. Now I'm going to take the longest leader cloth. This is the longest length that I have from the package, and I'm going to place this on my bottom front rail. I am putting this on a rolling rail frame. This is an original Continuum, but the same rules apply to any rolling rail frame, the Continuum, Continuum 2, any other rolling rail frames that Grace Company comes out with. This is not going to work for a hoop frame. That's a very different style of frame. So understand Hoop Frame Pro, or a Cutie frame is going to use a totally different loading system, totally different leader cloth. So rolling rail means the rails roll, and I like my Velcro on this bottom front rail and my top back rail. I have an idler rail here attached. So these are the two rails that I attach my leader cloth to. So one thing I've done that I probably should have done before I put my tube in, my red snapper tube in, is I have marked the center point of my leader cloth, and I've marked that with a red Sharpie so that way I can clearly see that mark against all the black marks on the leader cloth that's already printed on there. I need the center because as we are loading our quilt, our backing on, we fold it in half and start clamping from the center. So it's really nice to have that marked so you can clearly see it. You have a good visual on it whenever you get started. All right, so now I'm going to load this on, and this can create a lot of questions as far as the right or wrong way to load it, the right or wrong way to put it on. It's looking like my Velcro is attached this way, and you can always kind of double check yourself as far as the way in which your rail clamps. So this is coming and clamping this way, pulling back this way. So it rolls forward clockwise, okay? So whenever I'm thinking of that, I'm thinking, okay, well, that's going to be the way that it rolls up. I kind of want to keep that leader cloth going in that direction. So I'm actually going to place this right side down so that the printed side of the leader cloth is face down. I'm not worried about that. Totally doesn't matter, because as you can see, whenever I start to actually roll it up, I'll still be able to clamp because I have my line of contrast stitching. That's the most important thing. That's why I stitched that gusset with red thread. So here we go, just smoothing this in place. And it's looking like the tubes are extending just a little bit long. So I may end up actually trimming them down a little shorter. So there we go. That is nicely attached, and I just smooth my hand over it. And I'm still actually using the original Velcro that I attached whenever I set this frame up at 8 feet. I have just added the little sections, 2-foot sections to it that it hasn't lifted up. The sticky is still sticky. So at any point in time when the sticky stops being sticky, I do have rolls of Velcro that will go on and replace that. But so far I haven't needed to, which is pretty shocking actually. So I just smooth this out with my hand, making sure that that super strong Velcro is nicely attached all the way. And then I can start rolling this up. And I'll just show you whenever I pull this up to load, I pull it up to this surface and then I clip on my backing fabric, having the leader cloth go up and over that top front rail. That's how it works best for me. Now let's do our back top rail. Now attaching my leader cloth to this back rail is the exact same process. I've marked the center point on the leader cloth, both on the edge of the Velcro and on the edge with the tube. So that way it's marked nicely. I have the center of the rail right here, and I just line that up. Now in this particular case, this is going to end up with the leader cloth, as you can see, printed side up. That's just what's working in this particular situation. I'm not saying it's going to be identical for you. It could end up being different, but I like it like this because whenever I load this side, I actually roll the leader cloth up quite a bit, and then I clamp right on top of the rail. So I'm going to get this attached and smoothed out, and then we're going to load a pretty big quilt here together. Now this is an extra thing I've done simply because I have a batting rail on this frame. And I'll be honest, I haven't really used this rail very much up until this point. Now that it's 12 feet, my frame is 12 feet, I'm going to use the shortest leader cloth, and I've installed red snappers into it. I'm going to use this to store backing fabric. So I will sew extra wide backing fabric. It can be up to 136 inches wide. That's the limit of this frame backing wise. Your quilt is going to be obviously a little bit smaller than that. And then I can load up and put this extra wide backing fabric on, and that way it's stored, it's out of the way, I know it's on there, it's ready to go. And if I have a particularly large quilt and I am in a particularly big hurry, then I can just quickly unroll this and use it to load my frame. Now keep in mind, this is storage purposes only. I am not going to use this in the actual loading of the frame because there isn't a ratchet on this rail. It doesn't lock. This is for storage purposes only. So that's what I'm doing with that shortest leader cloth. And just like the other ones, I have a center point. I find the center of my fabric, line that up, and going ahead and clamp. And I'm just going to clamp it with these shorter clamps just to hold it in place, roll it up on this rail, nice and out of the way. So this is a little unique to my particular frame and how I've set it up, but it might be useful for you, so I figured I'd share it. All right, so we want to make sure that our backing fabric is right side down facing the floor. So here's my right side. I found the midpoint of the backing, and this is very, very long. This is almost the length of the frame. So it's going to be a little bit to shift it into position. So I'm sliding it over here. I'm going to take that midpoint that I've pinched between my fingers, and I'm just going to line that up with that red mark that I marked on the leaders. And this is where that red line of stitching comes in handy. I take the edge of the fabric to that line of stitching and I line it up nice and straight, and then I place my small clamp. Very, very simple. Spread out the fabric, working my way down, and smooth it out. Place another clamp. And we work with these short clamps first. And working from the back of the frame is what works best for me. I do have a 21-inch long arm, so I found that it was just too much of a stretch to try and reach from the front. So I just started standing at the back. This is just what works best for me. So I just smooth that out and place that small clamp. Now I'm going to take this all the way to the two edges, and then I grab my longer clamps. So what we're going to do, we're going to take the longer clamp, smooth out that fabric in between, and I usually would press my fabric just a little bit better than this. Kind of in a hurry, guys. Trying to show you all the steps to red snappers this week. All right, so here we go, and I just smooth that out and place that clamp, and then I can remove the smaller clamps as I go. So there we go. You'll kind of come up with your own system. These are brand new, so of course they're a little stiff. There we go. That looks great. And I'm just going to work my way down, lining up the fabric, place a smaller clamp. Let's go on ahead and take this all the way to the end so that way you can see what it looks like. And this will also help you check yourself. You can make sure if you have any seams in your backing fabric that they're facing up. You want those seams facing up. Facing up at this stage is towards the inside of the quilt, meaning inside the quilt you won't see those seams on the outside. And so now it's just a process of removing those smaller clamps, making sure that the fabric is nicely smoothed out, and then placing my longer clamp. And I just smooth that out. You know, you don't want to distort your backing fabric. You want to be careful that it's not pulling, you know. Just watch out for, you know, anything kind of weird looking. And then you can cut your longer pieces in half if necessary. I've got some medium lengths here that I use if I need them. So there we go. That is that section done. So I'm going to repeat the whole thing working this way, and then let's clamp that bottom front rail. Now we're ready to load the opposite side of our backing fabric. And just to check yourself, make sure that the right side is facing down or facing the floor. Any seam lines or the wrong side of your backing fabric should be facing up right now. And find the midpoint of your leader cloth. Now, this is something that has confused people just a little bit because I said I took the leaders off of my top front rail. Well, a lot of quilters seem to think that meant I bypassed it, meaning I went underneath it. No, I have the leader go up and over that top front rail, and I clamp like this right along this top front rail, so that way the quilt flows over this top rail and then around to load and actually build up here on this bottom front rail. So this is one of those funny things that we can get really confused and really, I think, a little obsessed about doing it right. And it ultimately comes down to doing what works for you. Play with it, come up with your own process. It's taken me a few years to come up with a process that I really like. And now I even go so far as to usually will thread baste my quilts on the frame simply for more stability, just in case I want to decide to do pantos or QCT, some computerized quilting, anything like that. I really like to have more stability of the quilt top. So, and then using the side clamps. I wasn't doing that when I first started using this frame. So it's a process and it should be allowed to evolve. So as you can see, I just go down the line using the small clamps first and getting the backing fabric generally clamped in place. And grab a few more of these little clamps. This is the first time I'm loading the full 12 feet, guys. So I'm gonna have to grab a few more of these little guys in order to load this much fabric. Lock that ratchet and roll up just a little bit. There we go. And I just line up. This is, again, I'm using that red stitching line. I use red thread whenever I stitch that casing or gusset for my red snappers, so I can bring the edge of the fabric to that stitching line, hold it in place, and then place my clamp. And some of these I cut a little bit long. I actually took some of my original clamps and cut them down into 3-inch and 4-inch pieces. I find that I need a lot of different sizes just depending on the size of the quilt that I'm doing. So there we go. And then now I'll grab my longer clamps and start working between. And it's up to you whether you want to leave the smaller clamps in place or remove them as you go. I don't think it hurts either way. My tendency is to leave the center one in place, not move that one, but I tend to remove all the rest as I go. And these are brand new and a little stiff, I'm finding. So I just roll that tube right up to the top of the rail, and then I'm pressing, as I press, I'm pressing both the rail and the tube together. I'm using that to help me lock that in place. And I have heard from quilters, if you don't have a lot of strength in your hands, this might not work for you. And that's one honest thing about it, but I can say this is a whole lot easier on my hands than penning. And this is what I love. I can sit here and talk through this and clamp in 5 minutes, both sides, right? Just working down the line. It takes so much more time to pen because you need the pens, the end of one pen to hit the head of the next, and keeping them that close together means a lot of pens going all the way down the frame. So it can be very, very time consuming. So this is why I use red snappers. It is easier. It is faster. That's the number one thing. And getting used to this new set. I kind of like these shorter clamps because they are a little, I don't know, less unwieldy. The original clamps, as you can see, were very, very long. They were double the length, but they're a little bit trickier to handle and get used to. I think the shorter ones are probably going to be a little bit more user-friendly. So that is it for loading up. From here, I'm just going to continue clamping across, and then I will roll this up. As you can see, it rolls up on that, going up and over, and then I will roll this one up. And so between the two, we will have our nice loaded frame with our backing fabric, and then I layer on the batting and then the quilt top right side up. So that is how I install red snappers and use them on my frame. I hope you enjoyed this detailed video, including the stitching on how to get started with this. It will definitely save you lots of time in loading your frame, your rolling rail frame for quilting. So if you'd like to check out and learn more about red snappers, come and check them out at leahday.com/snapper. Until next time, let's go quilt.